Okay, everyone. Good morning. Really a warm welcome to all of you here. This is the very first session that we have in the Open Government 2016 Summit, and we have an incredibly exciting topic to discuss with you today. My name is Manish Bapna. I'm the Executive Vice President of the World Resources Institute, and along with France, are the lead co-chairs of the Open Government Partnership for the coming year. I'm going to introduce them in greater detail in just a minute, but we do have on this panel two fantastic speakers, Richard Kinley and Laurence Monier-Smith, and I will come back to them and give a little bit more of a detailed bio for them in just a minute. But I wanted to take a minute to briefly introduce what we aim to do in this session today. For those of you who were here yesterday, you heard President Hollande speak passionately that 1 year ago, almost to this day, there were the greatest gathering of heads of state at an event outside of UNGA ever. And it was the COP21, the Paris Climate Conference. Remarkable achievement, and huge credit goes both to the UNFCCC and to France for the tremendous political skill they demonstrated in putting together something that I think exceeded everyone's expectations. A year later, we have here a summit about open government, about how to really respond and advance transparency, civic participation, accountability. How do we think about democracy at a time when we are seeing remarkable countervailing forces in the world today? Look how much the world has changed in the past 12 months. But the interesting thing is that very few people actually straddle both of these worlds. So, and that is what we feel, that there might be an incredible opportunity to bring these two worlds together. And I just want to take a quick show of hands. How many of you here were actually at COP21, the climate conference, a year ago, or at a UNFCCC conference? And of those of you who are raising your hand, were any of you, no, keep your hands up, were any of you here at a previous Open Government Summit, regional, country, global summit for open government before that? So we have, one person. The point I'm trying to make here is that these are two communities that work on issues that are actually tightly interlinked, but that have not spoken to each other much at all. Two very different languages. For us, NAPs are national action plans, and the UNFCCC, they're national adaptation plans. Very different acronyms, very different languages, yet the agendas are tightly interlinked. So for the open government community, we heard yesterday quite a consistent message about how we need to broaden the base, how we need to look at open government in ways that make a difference in people's lives. And climate, when you think about it, is actually, at the end of the day, how we produce energy. It is about how we design our cities. It is about how we protect our forests, how we grow our food. These are things that ultimately are not about just intergovernmental negotiations. They're very much about how people live their lives. And for the climate community, much of the conversation around transparency and accountability has been about the modalities in the intergovernmental space. But I think we would make the argument that there has been much that needs to be done, can be done at the domestic level around transparency, around public engagement. And in that spirit, France and WRI have tried to make climate an important theme for the coming year for the Open Government Partnership. And as many of you know, we have almost 10 countries that have now put forward commitments on climate action in their OGP national action plans. And we also have a number of collective actions in the Paris Declaration for OGP that speak to climate. And I'm going to come back to both of those in a moment. The way I'd like to organize this session this morning is we're going to have some initial remarks from both of our panelists here. I might call on a couple of people in the audience to share some of their reflections from a global gathering that we had on Monday and Tuesday, bringing these different communities together. And then we would really like to have a conversation with all of you about how we take these interlinked agendas forward. So with that, let me just say just a couple more words about our two speakers. Richard Kinley is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, the number 2 position in the Secretariat that has been the kind of architect of the intergovernmental negotiations, and in that context has played a hugely important role in managing the overall Secretariat, but also perhaps even more importantly in getting us to where we are today, which is a very strong international agreement around how to move forward. For those who may not know what happened in Paris a year ago, he might say a few words about that and the architecture, the road that it articulates for how we take forward to tackle this challenging problem. And Laurence Monnier-Smith is the Commissioner General for Sustainable Development here in France, previously Vice President of the National Commission for Public Debate, where she has also contributed a lot to the development of representative and participatory democracy tools. So someone who has straddled both the worlds of sustainable development, but also kind of the open government, civic, public participation worlds. So we're absolutely delighted to have both of you here. Perhaps we can start with just some initial remarks on this topic from both of you, and then we'll bring in some of the voices from the audience. So let me turn it over to Richard.
Great, thank you, Manish, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and breaking new ground to a certain extent with this conversation. I thought I might try to help kick things off by making 3 points, one looking back a bit, one for now, and one looking forward into the future. Looking back, but not far, only about a year, as was just mentioned. A year ago, we were all here in Paris worrying about what the outcome would be. Now we can talk about the outcome. And I think for me, the point I wanted to leave with you is that I feel the Paris Agreement embodies the principles of the Open Government Partnership. Not only in the way that it was developed, but in its content. The agreement was based on 25 years of history under the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is very much oriented towards data, reporting, review, transparency. So these are core principles that go back a long way and are reflected still in the Paris Agreement. But it's also, how one does things is also important, as those of you who are open government practitioners know that better than most. And I think that the diplomacy of the French government as the presidency of the process leading up to Paris, the leadership of Laurent Fabius, really embodied the principles of inclusiveness, transparency, and participation that made the Paris Agreement possible. And lastly, the principles of open government are indeed embedded in the Paris Agreement, whether in its specific provisions about participation and access to information, but more importantly in the whole architecture of the agreement, where the fundamental commitment is one of presenting a plan, then presenting information on how a country is implementing that plan, and how the accountability is through the transparency. So I think that all of these things together mean that there's a great marriage between the Paris Agreement world, the climate world, and the open government dimension. Then my second point is more for now. The Paris Agreement came into force about a month ago, and we're now in the stages of implementation. And one of the centerpieces of this whole implementation exercise is what we call the nationally determined contributions. And these are the pledges that countries have made under the Paris Agreement, what they're going to do to limit their emissions and to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And many of these NDCs are pledges that have been presented, and last year it was really quite a remarkable achievement to get virtually every country in the world making coming forward with these pledges. Many of them were developed in countries with really quite extensive public participation components, which I think is very laudable. But now we turn to the hard part. I once had a boss who said you should never stick around for implementation. Well, we're now in implementation mode, how to make this all work. And I think the principles of open government are also extremely important here, because what we're talking about is very large-scale, national level action. Manish mentioned this at the beginning, as we now move in the post-Paris world from a certain focus on what is happening at the international level. The locus of action has now shifted to country level. This is where climate action has to happen now, with support from the international level, but it really is very much embedded in national consensus building, mobilization of all sectors in economies to implement the pledges. And I would make a particular, put a particular emphasis on the importance of integrating these NDCs into national economic development plans. We all know how difficult multi-sectoral, cross-ministry work is, where everyone tends to be rather comfortable in silos and with business as usual. If we're going to succeed in this endeavor, we really, really have to break down these silos and barriers, and I think that you, in the open government world, can play an important role in doing this. We're not going to succeed in NDC implementation if we haven't done that. And speaking of integration, I can't leave this part of the intervention without saying that I think in integrating climate objectives, we also need to integrate sustainable development goals, which are being discussed in another panel a bit later. And then my third point is looking to the future. If we're going to resolve this huge, huge challenge that is global climate change, and then to achieve the vision of the Paris Agreement, and that vision is that global emissions will peak soon, and I can't tell you that soon has to be very soon, and that these emissions would then decline rapidly thereafter. This means there needs to be a transformation in societies to fundamentally different modes of economic development, to basically low-carbon societies. And this needs to be done in a time frame and at a scale that is unprecedented in history. So we are facing a really huge challenge. And it seems to me that only an open government model is going to allow this kind of transformation to succeed, because we need to bring sectors together. We need social mobilization and conversation to move the whole climate transformation. We have good indicators. We now have an international agreement which defines, and legally so, a destination. We have governments are mobilizing, private sector. We see increasingly good indicators of how private sector is changing. We're seeing cities mobilizing to a great degree. Price signals, in particular on renewable energy, are moving in a very, very good direction. And the investment community is increasingly looking at risk. So all of these, what you might call ingredients of transformation, need to be driven forward. And I think that if we want these trends to become irreversible, we then need to really embark on a huge social mobilization, social and economic mobilization that will turn these trends into something that really is irreversible.
Great. Thank you, Richard. That was a fantastic introduction. And just to echo that point that he made about climate and the SDGs, it reminds me of a statement that the outgoing Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has often made. We are the first generation that can eradicate extreme poverty and the last one to successfully address climate change. So really connecting climate, sustainable development, and open government together is a very important point of the narrative. Let me turn it over now to Laurence and to share a little bit about France has been a real champion of both agendas. Could you say a few words about why?
Oui, avec grand plaisir. I'm sorry, everyone, but I have, as a civil servant, to speak in French. So maybe some of you need to put your handset on. Yes, thank you. Merci beaucoup pour cette invitation. C'est vrai que depuis en particulier l'année dernière, la France s'est énormément mobilisée sur 3 terrains internationaux. Le principal étant bien sûr celui de la COP21. Le second, et je vais montrer la cohérence de la mobilisation française sur ces 3 terrains. Donc premier terrain, la COP21. Deuxième terrain, la mise en œuvre des objectifs du développement durable. C'est pour ça que je rebondis sur ce que vous avez dit à l'instant. Et le troisième terrain qui était pour nous extrêmement important, mais un petit peu plus en interne, un vaste chantier qui a été voulu par le président de la République et demandé à Madame Ségolène Royal, ministre de l'Environnement, un vaste chantier sur le développement de la participation citoyenne en France. Donc vous voyez, il y a une cohérence extrêmement forte entre la volonté présidentielle pendant la COP21 d'organiser une très forte participation citoyenne à travers la création de cet espace Génération Climat, à travers la mobilisation des entreprises et de l'ensemble des acteurs. Et ce que nous avons vu à Paris pendant la COP21, c'est un élargissement de la mobilisation de l'ensemble des acteurs pour faire face à cet très grand enjeu. Donc si la COP21 a été une grande réussite, c'est évidemment l'accord de Paris. C'est aussi, pour la première fois, la mise en visibilité d'une mobilisation extrêmement puissante de l'ensemble des ONG internationales et des entreprises, vous l'avez rappelé, notamment sur les questions du prix du carbone, de la finance verte, etc. Cette mobilisation qui a eu lieu toute l'année. En parallèle de ça, cette mobilisation pour l'organisation du plan français sur les objectifs du développement durable repose sur les mêmes prémices. ODD numéro 17, partenariat, construire un plan national français basé sur une réflexion avec l'ensemble des ONG et des entreprises. Et donc, comment la France va utiliser ce qu'elle a fait pour tout le travail qui a été réalisé pour approcher ou rapprocher de façon transversale et non plus en silo la lutte contre le dérèglement climatique, la lutte contre la pauvreté et les inégalités. Et lorsque Ségolène Royal a présenté au Forum politique de haut niveau en juillet dernier le plan national d'action français, c'était ce rapprochement qui était extrêmement fort, qu'elle a mis particulièrement en évidence. Et troisième point, en France, grand chantier sur la démocratie participative, et là vous voyez encore toujours cette même logique, grand chantier pour mettre en place de nouveaux dispositifs et de nouvelles procédures pour permettre à l'ensemble de la société civile de se mobiliser, de participer davantage à l'ensemble des décisions, en particulier sur des grands projets, des projets d'infrastructure, mais aussi des politiques publiques, des plans, et en particulier des plans territoriaux de lutte contre le changement climatique. Donc la mobilisation française qui a été organisée et qui était de la responsabilité de Ségolène Royal pendant la COP21 et qui s'est poursuivie toute cette année, c'était de mettre en place ces outils de participation, et c'est là que nous venons à la partie qui est davantage en ligne. Et c'est vrai qu'une des tâches que nous avons eues, qui nous a été demandée par Ségolène Royal au sein du Commissariat général au développement durable, c'était de faire rapprocher ces deux communautés, ces communautés de la participation citoyenne et ces associations environnementales, et cette communauté de l'open government, de la civic tech, pour pouvoir mettre en place ces différents dispositifs. Donc nous avons organisé des plateformes participatives, nous avons labellisé des projets environnementaux dans le cadre de la COP21 pour qu'on partage cette expérience, et dans le cadre du dispositif de participation citoyenne, de mettre en place ce nouveau droit qui est proposé dans le cadre de notre nouvelle loi sur la participation citoyenne, ce droit d'initiative qui passe notamment par des outils en ligne. La Green Tech verte que Ségolène Royal a lancée, c'est justement cette communauté d'innovateurs qui vont proposer, dans le cadre de l'implémentation de nos INDC, donc ils proposent des solutions innovantes pour justement valoriser, lutter contre, permettre de développer des solutions d'efficacité énergétique, lutter pour la préservation de la biodiversité, permettre des transports, favoriser la mobilité durable, etc. Une centaine de start-up en un an ont été notamment sélectionnées et vont maintenant être incubées. Donc vous voyez qu'il y a une volonté de notre ministère et qui fait pilote dans ce sens au sein du gouvernement à la demande du président de la République de rapprocher ces deux communautés pour pouvoir permettre une implication plus forte de la société civile.
Great. It's just really useful to hear that story, because I think to some extent, the commitment, the breadth and depth of commitment that we need behind the national climate plans depends on the breadth and depth of engagement with the public for support of that. And we see where we have countries that don't have that deep political support, the commitment to the targets in the national climate plans may not be as strong as they need to be. And coming from Washington, I can say firsthand the importance of how important that broad popular depth is. And I think it's also the other thing that I think, Franz, you know, that you put on the table that's quite interesting is the role of kind of technology and innovation as ways in which to kind of think creatively about how we get the transformation that Richard talked about, of moving from not just a small deviation in our emissions pathway, but how do you get the deep decarbonization that we need to see very quickly. So another kind of very important point. I wanted to, we want to make this quite interactive, so I have a number of other questions for the panelists, but I'm going to come to the audience to get a few questions as well, just in order to create a bit of a conversation. We still have 20 minutes left. But before we do that, I wanted to ask, there was a global gathering on Monday and Tuesday where we had over 100 people from 3 different communities: the open government community, the environmental governance community, and the climate community meet to talk about precisely this issue. And I believe one of my colleagues, and I'm looking at them, Carol, is going to just say a few words about that. And then I'd like to open it up, take a few questions, throw in a few questions, and come back to our panelists. So let me ask Carol if you want to say a few words about the global gathering.
Thank you, Manish, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for those wonderful contributions. I think that some of the things you said resonated so strongly with me. The global gathering that was held as a pre-event to the Open Government Summit really, for the first time, I feel we brought the climate community and the open government community together. And we tried to understand the different languages that we speak and try to understand really how open government tools and processes can ensure more effective implementation of the Paris Agreement on the one hand, and definitely from the climate advocates as well. They were learning as we were learning together. I think some of the key things that came out first was this real sense that open government commitments, especially through OGP, can help in fulfilling Article 12. That really, as it focuses on national level implementation, that it's key that there's an understanding what role open government can play, that there's familiarity with some of the tools we use, whether it's open data or freedom of information laws, and that we share as communities of actors how to use these effectively, which means a lot of capacity building, because climate advocates don't necessarily use those tools. And in areas specifically, for example, like climate finance, there was a real sense of the need for even understanding open data and how it can understand how you can track climate finance, for example, as a real important tool. Even freedom of information laws, how you can use them strategically to understand what government decision making, how it affects you. Other things that were really clear, there was a sense that there is a fear of civic space restrictions also affecting people like environmental defenders, climate activists, and how can issues around civic space be integrated into climate discussions as well, because you want social movements for change, but you don't also want to create dangers around those new movements. There was a real sense that open data and climate data, there is not enough an understanding of how much climate data is out there, how much is open, available, and can be utilized, and how governments are making that a priority, either under the SDG framework or under the climate framework. So a lot of work on open data and climate really needs to be done. Very interesting thing, there was some real key things that came out as solutions to begin the process of addressing these challenges. And one of them was about using the Open Government Partnership and creating a climate working group under the Open Government Partnership to bring governments and civil society together to create a real framework for action on some of these issues. Another thing that resonated to the top, I think, as well, was this idea of creating a census of open climate data in all the countries that are part of the Paris Agreement to understand what data is open, what's closed, and what needs to drive this effort to open more data. I'll just say two last things. There was a sense of the need to work with parliamentarians. So there's a whole thread of this summit on open parliament. And so how can that be integrated into parliamentarians understanding what that means to address climate? And I think lastly, I will just say there was a sense also at this issue of energy, there needs to be a clear focus on clean and inclusive energy decision making. How can you engage people to participate in energy decisions? And that is through looking at how you improve participatory mechanisms at the national level. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Great, Carol. That was very tangible examples of how these two conversations and communities do need to come together. That was great. Let's open it. Let's take a few questions, and I'm going to come back then to the panelists. Reflections, comments that you may have. Do we have we have a mic. Maybe easier. Yeah, please. Just quickly, who you are, and then a quick question. I think we had several hands that went up. So please, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Augustine Jamshi. I come from Cameroon. I am the coordinator for the Access Initiative, one of the coordinators in Africa. I'm also the chair of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. I'd like to thank the organizers, especially WRI and the French government, for this opportunity. It is not a coincidence that we had a Paris Agreement here 12 months ago and we're having this. I think this is the way. We heard about NDCs. It was most of the time, the NDCs were done in a haste, in such a way that the communities that have been demanded a lot of sacrifices from did not have the time or the understanding that they needed to participate in the drafting of these NDCs. So it is not too late. I think we have the opportunity, using the governance principles of the Open Government Partnership, to actually get back to the communities and let them be involved in this, because it demands a lot of sacrifices. My question is, how far is WRI and the French government willing to support us on the ground? Those are the front lines of building the capacity of communities to articulate their issues and demand transparency and openness from their governments. Such projects, how far are you willing to go to support us on the ground? Because we have many projects. One, we have the African Climate Legislation Initiative with African parliamentarians saying that legislation about climate change cannot be done in conference halls or ministries again. It has to be with the people and by the people if we have to work on climate legislation to fight climate change. We also have the African Renewable Energy Initiative, which has a lot of support from the North. But if it is wrongly done, without the people and for the people, it will still be clean energy, but accessed by great companies while the African population is in the darkness. So we have projects around the Lake Chad, about governance around the Lake Chad. So how far are you able to support us on these kind of projects? Because it's something as saying open governance at the higher level, and then on the ground we don't have the tools to work effectively for open governance. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to take a few more questions. There's so many hands up. But for those who may not, I know the acoustics aren't great, but it was a terrific question. So I just want to take, the NDCs were prepared quite quickly. A lot of public wasn't engaged. There's other major initiatives that came out in the Paris and in the Marrakesh COPs that, again, public support will be huge. As much as the question is for France and WRI, I think to some extent, the UNFCCC may also have some very important reflections on that. Fantastic question. Please, who has the mic?
I got it here.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Manish.
Tomás.
My name is Tomás Severino from Mexico, Cultura Ecológica. And following up on these questions, it's not among us. The critic is not to open government partnership or the Paris Agreement. That we are all agree on that. The point is, how do we, when the reality shows us that the world, the economic interests still go for extractive industry, for energy, for destroying our forests, polluting the sea. So how do we get down with these political agreements on the ground for the people and for the natural resources? And we have more tools, but the reality is that it's just among us and the rest of the world and the economy. Like, sometimes it looks like they don't really care. Yeah, sorry to be, I mean, yeah. Thank you, and thanks for the interesting panel.
Great question. Invested interest, political economy, and open government. We're going to take 2 or 3 more hands, and then I'm going to come back to the speakers. Yes, please.
Voilà, bonjour, chers panélistes. Moi, c'est Mamoudou Bari. Je viens du Sénégal, Dakar. Je suis le directeur exécutif d'une ONG qui s'appelle Action Solidaire Internationale. Alors, je voudrais simplement revenir sur les CPN, les contributions déterminées au niveau national. C'est un véritable débat qui nous intéresse, notamment nous les pays africains. Il faut dire que le processus justement d'élaboration de ces CPN est un peu différent dans les pays. C'est en fonction justement des engagements des uns et des autres. Moi, je prends juste l'exemple du Sénégal. Pour l'élaboration justement de ces CPN au Sénégal, nous, en tant qu'organisation de la société civile, nous avons été impliqués justement dans cette élaboration. Donc, nous avons effectivement compris, ça il faut le dire, que le temps était court pour arriver véritablement à l'élaboration d'un bon document de CPN. Mais néanmoins, nous avons pu constater que justement, la société civile a été impliquée, a été justement appelée à la réflexion. Mais l'autre constat que nous avons fait, c'est que même si en tant que société civile, nous avons été impliqués, on ne nous a pas donné le temps qu'il faut pour informer les populations. Parce que nous travaillons pour les citoyens. Nous travaillons pour les populations. Nous n'avons pas eu le temps qu'il fallait pour véritablement aller vers les populations, aller vers nos cibles pour leur parler de ça, pour leur permettre également de pouvoir recueillir leur point de vue. Donc, ça a été véritablement une course avec le temps. Et malheureusement, il devait y avoir justement l'élaboration de ces CPN. Ça a été fait. Maintenant, on n'en est plus là. Nous parlons de mise en œuvre. C'est important. Je voudrais justement savoir, certains l'ont dit, la mise en œuvre est aussi importante que l'élaboration. Dans nos pays, comme vous le savez, nos pays africains, ça peut être un peu compliqué. On parle de open data, mais évidemment, il faut aussi constater que ça peut être extrêmement compliqué dans ces pays. Je voudrais justement demander comment l'OGP, quels sont les outils que l'OGP a développé ou bien pourrait développer pour véritablement mettre ça à la disposition de la société civile pour pouvoir véritablement aider à la mise en œuvre. Dernière chose, c'est le financement vert. C'est important. Nos États vont recevoir beaucoup d'argent pour justement le financement de l'atténuation ou bien de l'adaptation. Encore, je demande comment vous pouvez nous aider en termes d'outils. Quels sont les outils que vous pouvez développer pour nous permettre, nous, la société civile, de pouvoir suivre justement le financement de ces projets au niveau national, justement à travers le contrôle et le suivi. Donc, moi, j'interpelle vraiment l'OGP pour voir quelle collaboration peut-être serait possible, en tout cas avec la société civile, pour véritablement faire un bon suivi d'évaluation de la mise en œuvre de ces projets au niveau national. Je vous remercie.
Great questions. Let me take just 1 or 2 very brief, because I want to leave a few minutes for each of our speakers to respond. So please, if I could ask you just 30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, I attend a COP meeting every year, also the open data. So I'm going to cover the 2 backgrounds. And my question is about, in Asia, most of the NDC is top-down. And we need a kind of standard to know the open data platform about climate change issues. Any kind of protocol about climate change data open protocol. Because it's very useful for the people from the bottom up. Because most of the policy in Asia, including the China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, is top-down. And the second is that we know we have an emission gap, huge emission gap. So how can we linkage from the open data to help our climate change issues to shorten the gap? Thank you.
And finally, one final question again, 30 seconds. We'll try to get you a mic because just last question. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Just to brief, I didn't the NDC is highly important, but as the guy above said about the adaptation, I'm from Israel, and adaptation, it's on a regional scale, not only the national scale, because in a small state like Israel and the region. So not only in terms of finance assistance, also in terms of cooperation. We need the international community to support regional cooperation in our region. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna turn back now to the panelists. I'm not gonna ask each of you perhaps to pick up the set of questions you would like to respond to. Richard, would you like to start?
All right, I'll just maybe make a couple of comments in response to actually which were quite penetrating questions. I think that with regard to the question of the implementation of the NDCs and that some were prepared in haste, I think this is absolutely true. But what is even truer is that if you add up the NDCs, that they are still less than what the world needs to get to the objective that we have set. So we will have a process to review and update those over the course of the next few years. So I would see two challenges. One is making them work at the national level is a task for now, and this has to be a multi-sectoral effort, and there will be and has to be in most countries an opportunity for public participation in this, because it's not going to work if there isn't. That also applies to then the evolution and the future development of the NDCs, where we will by 2020 be looking for a whole new crop, and that's not that far away actually in the overall scheme of things. On the role of vested interests, I think this is a very obviously it's a reality of the current economy, but we do see rather interesting and promising trends of what's happening in the energy sector. Renewable energy is going up vastly. We see quite stark changes in the coal sector, for example. So I think we are beginning to see the trends and the indicators that we're moving in a new direction. And it really will be the impetus. Business has been asking for a long time, tell us where you want to go. Well, the international community has now told you where we want to go. It's under 2 degrees, reaching 1.5 degrees, peaking of emissions, and carbon neutrality in this century. Those are hugely powerful signals in an international treaty. And it will take a while for them to be internalized and ingested into the systems. It's not going to happen overnight. These are huge transformations, but it's going to then take this kind of open government mobilization that will be required, that will be really important to achieve it. And I think the last thing that I wanted to mention is about data. Yes, data is important. I do have a sense, though, from what, was it Carolyn said, that there's a huge amount of data out there, actually. It's almost indigestible. And maybe what we need to think a bit more about is how we can make that more understandable for people as they become more involved in the policy process. And it's not just about emission data, it's also weather information and impacts information, because communities are being affected now, and they can protect themselves if they have more information. It's quite clear. And then increasingly important is information on support, how finance is flowing, how it's increasing, where it's going, how to get access to it.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Let me turn it over to Laurence.
Just leave you a couple of seconds. Je vais réagir en 2 temps. La première partie sur la question de l'ouverture des données et sur la manière ensuite, dans un deuxième temps, comment en France on a construit justement la mise en œuvre des INDC. Alors, en ce qui concerne l'ouverture des données, nous avons effectivement entamé un énorme travail de mise à disposition des données, en particulier au sein du ministère de l'Environnement. Et un des outils qu'on utilise, c'est que Ségolène Royal a donc nommé un Chief Data Officer, comme ça se fait dans d'autres administrations. Et donc, au sein du commissariat général au développement durable, c'est moi qui est en charge ce vaste programme. Il s'appuie en particulier sur 2 lois qui ont été passées, des lois sur le numérique, et qui nous donnent des outils pour libérer les données d'énergie, ce qui était un point très important par rapport à ce que disait Madame tout à l'heure sur la question de l'appropriation de la consommation d'énergie, donc sur les données d'énergie et sur des centaines de données. Et comme vous le disiez, le problème n'est pas pas uniquement de cette mise à disposition des données, puisqu'en France, il y a quand même une tradition assez importante. C'est surtout comment est-ce qu'on fait le lien entre l'utilisateur de la donnée et le producteur de la donnée. Et pour ceci, on met en place un certain nombre de dispositifs qui sont très connus des gens et des participants à l'OGP. Donc des dispositifs de barcamp, de data session, de hackathon, de booster, c'est-à-dire des communautés qu'on constitue pour s'approprier les données. Par exemple, en ce moment même où je parle, il y a un hackathon qui démarre qui s'appelle O2D2 pour Open Objectif du développement durable, pour pouvoir essayer de réfléchir avec l'ensemble des partenaires comment les données issues des indicateurs peuvent être utilisées pour améliorer le plan d'action national de la France sur les SDGs. Et on fait ça dans beaucoup de domaines, dans le domaine du bâtiment, dans le domaine du transport. Chaque fois qu'on a des jeux de données importants, on organise des data sessions, des data sprints sur le risque, sur les inondations, par exemple, on a beaucoup travaillé là-dessus, sur les données de l'énergie, sur les données de la biodiversité, sur les données du logement et de l'urbanisme. Et chaque fois, on met en place des grandes sessions qui rassemblent des communautés très diverses, et puis justement les développeurs et les utilisateurs. Donc voilà, je sens que ça sonne. Sur les INDC, juste pour la mise en place des INDC en France, c'est un travail de long terme, puisque nous, on a fait une loi qui nous permet la loi de transition énergétique sur la croissance verte. Et Ségolène Royal a voulu que cette loi soit le premier acte de mise en œuvre des INDC. Et s'ensuit toute une série de stratégies pour pouvoir, en discussion avec justement le public, le Parlement, avoir cette participation plus large. Il y aurait encore beaucoup à dire, mais c'est la fin.
Great. No, thank you. And just a final remark. We're out of time. This is the beginning of a conversation. When we think about bringing these two communities together, it's important to note that doesn't mean we're asking the open government community to become climate specialists or the climate community to become open government specialists. It's really about being able to do what each community does extremely well, but how to get strategic alliances and partnerships in place that enable us to leverage what the other does in the most effective way. When we think about the problems we're trying to tackle, they are, as you both said, nothing less than whole-scale transformations in our economic and political systems. And we have, at the end of the day, as many people as we may have coming to COP21 or this summit, it's a small fraction of ultimately what we need to change the world. And so really finding ways to work together. I'm just going to close with a quote from Einstein. Only by aiming for the absurd can you achieve the impossible. And I think to some extent that is what binds us all together in these communities. And so let us find ways, break the silos, talk to each other, do what we do well, and continue the conversation at the next session. So with that, thank you all. Really appreciate a warm round of applause to both Laurence and to Richard. Thank you very much.